Welcome to Family History Mysteries, a podcast that tells the stories uncovered through family history research, the unexpected stories of everyday people. I am an avid family historian who has been compiling my family tree for over 15 years, with nearly 20,000 people recorded in my trees. Episode 99, Alias. John Burston featured in a newspaper article in reference to payments for an illegitimate child. His story got even more interesting when I discovered he enlisted in World War I under an alias. John Vincent Burston was born on the 16th of April 1896 at St Kilda in Victoria. He was the youngest of 4 children, born to John James Burston, an Englishman who'd immigrated with his family when he was 3, and Susan May Graydon, who were married in Taradale, Victoria in 1887. John had been married prior to Jane McMahon in 1868 in Port Fairy, Victoria. They had 11 children together. John Sr. also married for the 3rd time to Barbara Bain in 1907. On the 12th of October 1915, it announced the death of John James Burston, and it says the death occurred on Sunday at his residence, Orong Crescent, Caulfield. Mr. John James Burston, the well-known teacher at one time of North Bendigo. The deceased was connected with the department as a teacher for many years, his last charge being the school in Brighton Road, St Kilda. He retired from the service several years ago, and he was the author of Sound Work on Arithmetic, which was proved of great value to other teachers, both in studying for their own examinations and instructing their pupils. So John Burston was only 10 when his mother died and 19 when his father died. On July the 22nd, 1913, a warrant was issued for John not paying maintenance for an illegitimate child that was born on the 30th of June 1913 to May Florence Bull. They were both 19 at the time of the child's birth. The child, Maisie, went to the neglected children's department and was boarded out to May's mother, Eliza Jane Bull. And the warrant stated, Vincent Burston is charged on warrant with deserting his illegitimate child by May Florence Bull, servant, of 7 Lynch Street, Hawthorn, at Hawthorn on the 22nd of June. Description: clerk and typist, about 18 years of age, 5 foot high, stout build, fair complexion, clean shaven, blue eyes, brown hair, stutters slightly, wore a light grey tweed suit and a light felt hat. When John Burston enlisted in World War I on the 22nd of January 1915, 9 months before his father's death, he used an alias, John Henry Watson. He stated in the war record that he was born in August 1893, which made him 2.5 years older than what he actually was. And he was in the 8th Battalion, and he listed his occupation as a cycle and motor mechanic and a motor driver. He listed his next of kin as his cousin V.G. Burston of Bonhurst, Orong Crescent, Caulfield. John served in Egypt and Lemnos from the 26th of May 1915 and returned to Australia on the 29th of January 1916, medically unfit due to shell shock. In April 1916, he married Kate Harmon in Victoria under his birth name. Kate was the daughter of Samuel Frederick Harmon and Annie Rowe, who was born in 1891, so was 5 years older than James. From the 28th of February 1917, his war record stated he wanted to be known by the name of John Vincent Burston. He stated that he enlisted under the name of John Henry Watson and re-enlisted on the 5th of July 1916 to work in the Home Service as a clerk in Abbotsford, Victoria. When he was discharged, he was listed as a motor proprietor and living with Miss Lily Graydon in High Street, Prahran, Victoria, James's aunt. In the 1917 census, his wife Kate was living in Victoria Street, Abbotsford, but James was not listed. In 1919, they're living together in Box Hill. And Kate's death is listed on the 5th of December 1920 at Mildura. Suddenly, Kate, dearly loved wife of John Vincent Burston of Redcliffs, the second youngest daughter of Samuel Harmon, deeply loved and deeply mourned. Kate was only 29 when she died. There is an article in The Truth on the 3rd of March 1917, and it states, May's Mash, the story of a casual love affair, Burston blamed for the baby, soldier scorns the little stranger, but the Beaks say he is the father. A case with some remarkable features was heard at the Hawthorn Court on Tuesday when a returned soldier named John Vincent Burston, late of Orring Avenue, Caulfield, was charged with having unlawfully deserted his illegitimate female child born to him by May Florence Bull. A warrant has been issued for Burston's arrest on the 22nd of July 1913, but after a delay of nearly 4 years, it was only executed in Melbourne last week. Burston was in military uniform with the stripes of a corporal and also the colours of a returned man. The girl was accompanied into court by her mother, who had charge of the little tot in question. The informant, May Florence Bull, who gave her age as 23 but looked much younger, gave evidence that she was a domestic servant residing at Christabel Crescent, Hawthorn. She first became acquainted with the defendant in October 1912 when she met him in Elizabeth Street. Afterwards, she kept company with him until March of the following year, when he went away. Burston had intercourse with her for the first time about the second week in October, and subsequently she found out that she was in trouble and spoke to him about it. He then took her to a doctor near the Armadale station. The witness did not know his name. She was partly examined. On the way back, Burston asked her if she would marry him, and she said, "We had better own up to it." They then both went to see her mother, and when the latter was informed of her condition, Burston said he would take care of her. He continued to visit their house till March, when he went away to get work in the country. The witness received one letter from him which she produced, dated on the 9th of February 1913, written from Croydon, where he was employed at an orchard. He started off by calling her "my darling May," and after asking her not to mention anything about him to his relations, wound up with "your devoted husband, Jack Brown." He told her that as he was away from home, he went under another name so that his people would not find him. The child was born in a private hospital in Hawthorn on the 20th of June 1913, and the defendant was the father of it. Subsequently, she took out a warrant for his arrest and later had the child committed to the Neglected Children's Department and had aborted out to her mother. The doctor said that he thought it was a premature child. It was not healthy when it was born. She understood it weighed only 5 pounds. The witness did not remember the exact date when the defendant first had intercourse with her, but would contradict him if he said it was in November. Burston told her he was 19 years old at the time. Further cross-examined, the witness said that Burston first spoke to her in Elizabeth Street. She did not then tell him that her boy had gone to Sydney and that Burston could take his place. The evening that they first met, Burston had intercourse with her in Alexandra Avenue. She denied saying to the defendant's brother that she was 2 months pregnant in February. Mrs. Eliza Jane Bull, the mother of the informant, said that she lived in Haynes Street, Hawthorn. She knew the defendant and had first seen him during the second week of January 1913. Her daughter introduced him to her. Later on the same evening, May told her she was in trouble, and consequently Burston informed the witness that he wished to marry her daughter and that his father would not allow him. He asked if May's father would call and see his father. The witness said, "Is this true what my daughter says?" And he replied yes. She then asked him what his age he was, and she understood he said he was 17. The witness then told him that May had said that he was 21 and that he looked this old. He replied yes, and I wish I was older. The defendant then kept coming to her place till the first week of March 1913. After the warrant was issued, she said that he was boarding at her house. The child was born on June 30th, 1913, and the department was paying the witness 6 shillings a week for its keep. Edward Bull, the father of the girl, stated that he first met Burston in early January 1913 when he came to the witness and said, "I'm very sorry I have got your daughter into trouble, but I want to marry her." He added that the father thought he was too young, but if the witness went and saw them, he might persuade him to give consent. The defendant informed the witness that he was 19 years old and that he was of age and he had £250 or £300 coming to him. He gave the witness an address in Windsor to go and see his father. Later on, Burston went with him and pointed out the house. His father told the witness that he would have nothing to do with the matter. "I never had any trouble with my daughter till that man," indicating the defendant, "got a hold of her. I do not believe that she had intercourse with any other man. The arrangement was made for the confinement for her in the middle of the year." The only way the witness knew in January that his daughter was in trouble was when the defendant came and told him so. Mr. Jacobs said his client denied paternity. The girl was also a very unsatisfactory witness. And the JP, Mr. Philpott, said, "We differ from you there."
Mr. Jacobs said she undoubtedly fenced with some of her answer and admits that she had immoral relations with at least one other man. The defendant denies meeting her until the November, whereas intercourse must have taken place 2 months before. The girl says it was in October, but that would make it an 8-month-old baby, which was a very rare occurrence. There was no medical evidence to say that it was a prematurely born child. For the defence, John Vincent Burston rendered evidence that he was now 20 years of age and produced his birth certificate. He first met May Hall on the 20th of November 1912 and fixed the date because at that time he was employed in the office of the Master Builders Association and had to work back at night in consequence of being a plumber's strike. After finishing work on that night, he met her at 8:30 p.m. in Elizabeth Street. She said goodnight to him and immediately turned around and spoke to her. In the course of the conversation, she said her boy had gone to Sydney and that he could take her place. They afterwards went for a walk to the Alexandra Avenue, where he had intercourse with her. He had never been intimate with any other girl previously. She asked him if it was the first time, and he replied that it was. He then put the same question to her, and she admitted it was not the first time, and that the chap that had gone to Sydney had been intimate with her before. The last occasion the defendant had intercourse with her was at the end of January 1913. During that month, he took her to the doctor at Armadale and produced the receipt. The next, he went to see his brother, who was a married man. This girl asked the latter and his father if they could do anything. His brother stated that the first time that he saw the witness, it was in the latter end of November. Shortly after, the witness's father put him on a ship and sent him to Western Australia. He afterwards went to New South Wales, where he joined the military force under the assumed name of Watson, as his father would not consent to his posting, he being only 23 years of age. His father has since died and left him nothing. He's now a married man, but his wife had to undergo 2 operations. At the time he took the girl to the doctor, he believed he was the father of the expected child. Mr. Philpott asked, "Do you believe that now?" And the witness said no. To Mr. Jacobs, he said he heard when in Western Australia that the child was born on June the 30th, which made him believe he was not the father. Cyril Burston, brother of the accused, and Ellen Burston, his wife, were then called for the defence, and they stated that when the girl was brought to their home in about the middle of January 1913, she told them she'd known the defendant from the previous November. She also said that she had only been in a certain condition for about 2 months. The bench found that Burston was the father of the child and made an order to provide 7 shillings and 6 per week. The defendant defined surety of £25, in default 3 months imprisonment, and paid £2 2 shillings court costs. A stay of proceedings for 7 days was granted to permit an appeal. So John then re-enlisted on the 29th of January 1921 in the Naval and Military Expeditionary Force, serving at Rabaul. He stated his occupation as a stenographer and typist. His next of kin was initially listed as his brother, Vivian Graydon Burston of High Street, Prahran, not his cousin, as he previously stated on his World War I papers, but he then changed the record to his wife, Helena Mary Burston of Roslyn, via Goulburn, New South Wales. He stated his permanent address was care of Mrs. S.A. Bucket of Albion Road, Box Hill, Victoria. He left Australia on the 4th of February 1921, and James married Helena Mary McAleer in Sydney in February 1921. In the Melbourne Age on the 30th of August 1928, a queer marriage and its sequel, casual meeting in a Sydney street, married in 3 hours. Mr. Justice MacArthur, in the first civil court yesterday, heard further evidence in the case in which John Vincent Burston, 30 years old, of Atherton Road, Northcote, clerk, sought a divorce from Helena Mary Burston, 41 years, of Park Road, Hurstville, New South Wales, on the grounds of desertion. The petitioner stated he was married to the respondent on the 3rd of February 1921. At the time, he was a widower and a private in the AIF. He was in Sydney en route for New Guinea. He first met the respondent in the street at 4:30 afternoon. He and she took several drinks, then they dined together. At 7 p.m, they went to Christchurch, St Lawrence near Sydney, and were married. He did not remember in detail the circumstances of the marriage, as he was considerably under the influence of drink. The next day he took the respondent to the Victoria Barracks and made an allotment of his pay to her. She then said she wanted to go to her home, but she promised to see him at the steamer by which he was to sail that afternoon. She did not come to the steamer and he has not seen her since. He went to New Guinea but some months later was invalided. He wrote to the respondent but received no reply to his letter. While he was in the military hospital in Sydney, he made inquiries for the defence authorities as to whether they knew anything of his wife's whereabouts and was informed that the respondent had not drawn any of the allotment money. Soon after his return to Sydney, he received a telegram reading, "Everything must end. Don't try and find me. Lena." In June 1921, he was transferred to Caulfield Military Hospital and was there for some months. In 1924, he received a letter purporting to be from his wife in which she asked him to divorce her. He also got a letter in the same handwriting in 1926. He replied to the latter letter, but his letter was returned to him unopened. In answer to his honour, the petitioner said he was not able to say whether the letters were in his wife's writing or not. He had never seen her writing. He knew very little about her at all. Before the marriage ceremony, his wife had had several drinks, but he could not say whether or not she was intoxicated at the time. His Honour said he thought that there was a similarity about the writing on certain documents put in, and he would grant a decree nisi subject to an affidavit being filed by a handwriting expert of the examination of the writing on the documents believed to be the respondents. So then John went on to marry Lillian Catherine Augustin on the 27th of October 1931 at the Congregation Church in Bunbury, Western Australia. Lillian was the daughter of Frank Edward Augustin and Esther May Fowler. Lillian was 21 and John 35. On the 19th of March 1934, they had their first son at Kojanop, Western Australia. John was working on the road board as a secretary, and then they had another son in 1937. On the 2nd of January 1936, there was a sequestering order. The debtor's name, John Vincent Burston. Address, Bunbury, lately of Kojanop and Westonia. He was a secretary, and the date of the order was the 10th of December 1935. Lillian died on the 15th of June 1939. She died at only 29 years at Laverton Hospital, and she died of myocarditis, bronchopneumonia and debility. She left behind Kevin 8 years and Vincent Edward 5 years. It did state on the 24th of June 1939 that Mrs. Burston had been an inmate at the Laverton District Hospital for some weeks prior to her death, but her decease came as a great shock to her many friends and relations. She was born and educated in Bunbury and lived all her life in that centre until 2 years ago when her husband was appointed to the secretaryship of the Mount Margaret Road Board. John then married Clarice Adelaide Nowak on the 9th of September 1939 at East Coolgardie in Western Australia. Clarice was born in Buninyong, Victoria in about 1897. And on the 7th of August 1941 in the West Australian, it states Secretary's debts, salary deductions ordered. The financial affairs of John Vincent Burston, Secretary of the Augusta Margaret River Road Board, were investigated by the official receiver yesterday before the registrar in bankruptcy in the Commonwealth Bankruptcy Court. The debtor said that when he filed his bankruptcy petition in December 1935, he put a statement disclosing his liability to the 21 uninsured creditors totalling £116, his assets amounting to only £1. Burston, a middle-aged man, said that he had a wife and 2 young children who were wholly dependent on him. He enlisted in the 1st AIF in August 1914 and received a final discharge from the Army in 1922. He came from the state of Victoria in 1929 and has since held positions with various country road boards. Unfortunately, his work has been interrupted by periods of unemployment and of ill health caused by the complications following a recurrence of malaria, which he originally contracted while on active service abroad. His financial troubles began when he had a spell of unemployment lasting nearly 2 years. His difficulties were increased by expenses arising from medical treatment of one of his children following a motor accident. He discharged many of his debt, but this meant no real headway because in satisfying old creditors, he became indebted to new ones. He admitted that it had been a case of robbing Peter to pay Paul. He's now receiving a salary of £7 a week and a military pension of 16 shillings 9 pence a week. On the application of the official receiver, the registrar made an order for a deduction of £1 a week for the debtor's salary to meet his liabilities. Since 1938, said Mr. Boylston to Burston, you have been in receipt of a substantial salary, yet you've only paid £15 to reduce your debts, and until this morning your payments amounted to only £12. I cannot think you have made any real genuine effort to discharge your obligations to your creditors. You have been receiving a salary considerably above the basic wage, which is designed to cover the requirements of a man, his wife and his 2 children. I can see no reason why, in the circumstances, I should not accede to the official receiver's application. Mr. Johnson warned Burston that he would be liable to proceedings for contempt of court unless he complied with the orders strictly and regularly. And on the 25th of February 1943, in the District of Western Australia, in the bankrupt estate of John Vincent Burston, formerly of Congenup and Westonia, Secretary, a second dividend is intended to be declared in the above matter. So on the 17th of February 1943, debtors discharge. John Vincent Burston, a full-time WO in the VDC and formerly Secretary of several country road boards, on Wednesday successfully applied to the Registrar in bankruptcy for an order of discharge from bankruptcy. The official receiver, while not opposing the application and reporting that all Burston's proved creditors had now been paid 20 shillings in the pound, mentioned that a succession of letters addressed to the applicant in connection with his financial affairs from the official receiver's office in 1940 has been entirely ignored by him. The registrar said that the debtors could not be encouraged to treat correspondence from the official receiver with disdain and imagined they could entirely get away with such misfeasance. In consequence of the occurrence in 1940, for which the debtor's subsequent explanation had not been altogether satisfactory, his discharge from bankruptcy would be suspended for 1 month. On the 10th of January 1948, Australian Legion Police opposed club licence. In the Perth Licensing Court yesterday, it was adjourned for further consideration on application by John Vincent Burston of 12 Knutsford Street, North Perth, for a licence for the Australian Legion Club in the Grand Theatre Buildings, Murray Street. Mr. S. Tippett and Inspector Anderson for the Liquor Branch opposed the application. On the 1st of October 1948, J.V. Burston. Mr. John Vincent Burston, who for a lengthy period was State Secretary of the Perth branch of the Australian Legion of Ex-Servicemen, Men and Women, died of heart failure on the 8th of September at Marble Bar. At the time, he was a Junior Vice President of the Perth branch. His wife, Clarice Adelaide Burston, applied for John Burston's War Medals as his widow on the 16th of March 1969. At the time, she was living in Mount Lawley, Western Australia, when she requested them, and Clarice died in 1975 in Western Australia. So who was May Florence Bull, the young lady that took him to court for the maintenance of their child? Well, May Florence Bull was actually born Sissy May Bull in Launceston, Tasmania on the 11th of May 1893, the oldest child of 4 to Edward Bull and Eliza Jane Smith. Edward Bull had been born in Launceston in 1849. Edward's father, Charles Bull, was convicted of larceny and he was transported as a convict on the vessel Richmond to Van Diemen's Land in 1821. He was indicted for feloniously assaulting John Phillips on the King's Highway and taking from his person and against his will 2 seals valued at £2 10 shillings, 1 key valued at 10 shillings, 1 ring valued at 5 shillings, and part of a watch chain valued at 2 shillings and 6 pence. And Tobias Love, the constable, said the prisoner was brought to the watch house. He claimed the hat and I found a small knife on him. He was aged only 18 and found guilty and transported for life. So Charles Bull married Jane Boot in Launceston in 1835 and they had 11 children, which Edward Bull was one. And Edward Bull left for New Zealand in 1876 where he married Eliza Jane Smith there. Eliza had been born in England and emigrated to New Zealand with her family when she was 5. In 1914, May Florence Bull was listed in the census as living alone in Glenferrie Road, Hawthorn, and working as a tin plate printer. In 1917, she was living with her parents in Haynes Street, Glenferrie, the year of the maintenance case. May then married William Herbert Clerk on the 6th of November 1919 in Queensland. William was 6 years older than May, and they had 4 children together. William was a salesman and they lived at Yeronga and Paddington in Queensland. May's mother Eliza died in July 1921 and the assumption is that May reclaimed Maisie when she married William, as the family photo shows 5 children and it's taken in about 1925 when Maisie would have been 12. May died on the 6th of October 1954 in Queensland at the age of 61. There is a family tree that stated that Maisie's middle name was Winifred. There are records of a Maisie Winifred Clark, not Clerk, living in Sydney in the 1970s and working as a telephonist. This Maisie did not marry and died in New South Wales in 2005, aged 91. John Burston's children. The second child was Kevin Burston, born on the 27th of January 1931 in Wellington, Western Australia. He served in the Navy in 1950 and 1951, but by December 1951 was deemed unsuitable. On the 22nd of May 1953, he was listed as age 22 at Knutsford Street, North Perth, and he was released on a bond of £100 to come up for a sentence when called upon for a charge of gross indecency. He was working as a clerk and living with his stepmother, Clarice, in 1954. The third child of John Burston was Vincent Edward Burston, and he was born at Congenup, Western Australia on the 19th of March 1934. His mother was listed as Catherine Lillian Augustin, and Vincent was a bread carter in 1952 and then a retreader in 1958, living in North Perth. He married Dawn Lillian Bancroft on the 17th of May 1958 in Adelaide Terrace, Western Australia, and Vincent died in 1996 at Coolbalup, Western Australia, aged 61, and Vincent was a clerk as well. So the very interesting story of John Vincent Burston, including his alias.
If you are interested in sharing your story on my podcast, Family History Mysteries, please go to my Facebook page and send me a message. If you would like some assistance in filling in the gaps in your family tree to see what mysteries you solve, please get in touch. And don't forget, you can have early access to episodes by subscribing, and you'll also gain access to bonus episodes.